the fatted calf is killed in verse 23. Bring out the fatted calf and kill it. Let us eat and celebrate, for the son of mine was dead, and he's come to life again. So that's interesting. He's pointing out the extremes of what this man has been through. Okay, he was basically, for all intents and purposes, dead. Not that the father considered him as dead, but that in terms of the relationship between the father and the son, it was basically like a death. The separation was a death. And now it's as though he's been raised from the dead. And here he is, and the compassion, the love, the joy is the father can hardly contain himself. Now what's kind of interesting about this, and I like the fact that the son has recognized that he's done wrong, that he says, I've sinned against you and against heaven, and that he's willing to atone for, he's willing to make up for this. I mean, the son is serious about this, and he's even got this formal statement. And I think maybe, as sons sometimes do, he thinks he's going to impress his dad with, the formality of this statement. And the formality of what the son was intending to say to the father is contrasted with almost the complete informality, almost the unbridled joy of the father, who pushes formality aside and he hugs the son and he kisses his neck and he clothes him basically. I mean, imagine imagine the shape of this kid. If his mother were there, he'd say, "Oh, you look so thin. What have you been eating? Pig pods? What is this?" But he probably looked like a complete mess. And it was almost as though he had been raised from the dead. The contrast was that stark, perhaps. The fatted calf, verse 23. This, by the way, becomes kind of the symbol of a bone of contention of the older brother, who says, "You didn't even kill a goat for me." Dead and alive, we talked about that. The word for celebrate, by the way, it's not just I'm rejoicing. Now the joy becomes a celebration. The whole estate is celebrating. Verse 23, 24, 29, and 32, this idea of celebration kind of becomes a theme here. As with the shepherd, as with the woman, the father expects everyone on the estate to align themselves with the joy that he is experiencing. And if you're hearing this for the first time, and you've forgotten about the older brother. I mean, the older brother hasn't been a factor in this entire story. You got a dad, there are two kids, and the younger kid, as younger brothers sometimes do, he turns out to be the goofball, but now he's come back. You think the story is over now. You want the story to be over now. Why? Because we love these kind of happy endings. Just as in the other three, there was rejoicing, there was an expectation that not only was the person that had found something would rejoice, but everyone would rejoice and align themselves with the joy of the person who had found something. Primary actors. In the first one, you have a shepherd actively seeking sheep. In the second one, you have a woman actively seeking her coin. In the third one, you have a father passively watching. The seeker is not the one actively seeking. He's passively watching. The one who is active is the one who is lost. But then you have an older son who, as we're about to see, is actively avoiding the joy, the whole vortex of joy that has now become this estate because the son has come back. The older son refuses is our last little section here, and we'll go through this pretty quickly. Verses 24 through 32. Notice where we find the older son, verses 25 through 32. Notice where we find the older son. Now, verse 25, now his older son, the father's older son, was in the field. So what's the older son doing? He's working. He's being responsible. He's doing what he's supposed to do. Now, as I was thinking about this, As I was thinking about this, I got to thinking, okay, he's going through he's doing what he dutifully should be doing. He's carrying out his obligations for the Father. but that seems to be all he's able to do in relationship to the Father. He can carry out the tasks of the Father, but he can't align himself with the heart of the Father. He can go through all the motions that the Father expects him to go through, but he still hasn't aligned himself with the profound compassion that the Father has for both of his sons, especially for the one who is gone and has now returned. And I can't help but think that Jesus is making a profound accusation about the first century Judaism of his day. You're doing everything that we, the Trinity, asked you to do. You got the law, you got the things, you've added a couple other regulations, so you're going through all the motions, doing what you were supposed to do, very dutifully. But you still haven't aligned yourself with the heart of the Father. And until you do that, the duty is kind of useless. And I mean, do we do this sometimes? We go through the motions, we do the religious duty, but have we really aligned ourselves with the heart of the Father, a heart of profound compassion for those that we look at with disdain and disgust? The older son, verse, let's see. So in verse 25, he's working, he comes to the house. Interestingly, he's far out in the field. I mean, he's really working. And he comes into the house. There's all this rejoicing. The older son, as he gets closer, he summons a servant. In verse 26, what's going on? The servant is all excited about this. The servant has aligned himself with the heart of the Father. He says, hey, your father has killed the fatted calf. He's received back his son safe and sound. The servant, who's just a servant, he himself has aligned himself with the compassion and the profound love of the Father, but the older son, is still having a hard time with that. Verse 28, the older son became angry and was not willing to go in, and his father came out and began imploring him. Okay. The word for to become angry is the word, yes sir?
I just thought of something. This was a time when if your son left, you might very well never see him again. He couldn't call home. He couldn't catch a plane home. It was probably very common.
I expect the father never intended to see the son again, yes. I think you're absolutely right. Because of the way the son left, maybe because of the dangers of the world. Yeah, I mean, you're not just going to hop on a plane and come back home. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right. That's a good point. The son in verse 28, the older son becomes angry. The word here is orgizomai, from which we get the word orge, or wrath, the wrath of God. So the son is not angry, he is wrathful. I mean, he is beyond frustrated about what's going on here. He is filled with rage, with the same word that is used of God's eschatological anger on the entire. I mean, this is a very serious word. Other words used for anger. There are other words out there. This is a very powerful word. He is not willing to go in. Now, in Luke and in several of the other Gospels, and especially some of the parables we'll get into about eschatology, the idea of going in and coming out is very important. Like we've seen in other, you're either in or you're out. I mean, that's kind of like we've seen in 2 John and 1 John. The idea of being in and being out is very important, but it says of the son, he was not even willing to go in. To go in where? Doesn't matter. I'm not going in there. I'm not going in the garage. I'm not going in the house. I'm not going in the property. I'm not going in. I don't want to be in any way associated with this ridiculous festival of unwarranted compassion for this kid. You don't want to be a part of it. And it's really too bad. And by the way, so we got to have orgizomai, the wrath, and then we have the father comes out and he encouraged or pleaded. This is the word parakaleo, from which we get paraclete, Holy Spirit. I'm not saying the Holy Spirit is in this. I'm just saying that this is a profoundly your religious word for the first Christians or first believers that heard this. An encouraging, maybe a little bit of a provoking to do the right thing as well as fathers do for their sons. But he comes out. Now, it's really, I just kind of wrote this down by way of commentary. It is too bad that the father's joy at having the younger son back is mitigated, and I might even say ruined, by the older son's petulance. Now, let me just kind of jump to the end point, and then we'll come back. I'm running out of time, but we have to at some point say, wow, I really thought I was identifying with the son, the younger son. Now Jesus is making me identify with the older son. I'd rather be the younger son, but I see more of myself in the older son. And we've got to sit here and imagine when we somehow do not appreciate the mercy that God has shown to those that we don't think deserve it, when we don't appreciate it, when we think it's wrong, when that bothers us, that means somehow we detract from the joy the Father may have had in his exercise of mercy to that individual. I mean, I can tell you the last thing that this father wants to be doing is out in the garage, having this debate with the son. He wants to be in with the younger son who has just returned. And by the way, I find it interesting that the older son, who is behaving so poorly, is getting the father's attention. And in fact, it says in verse, the father in verse 31, we'll look at this in just a minute, he says, son, you've always been with me. Here I am, we're wrangling about this now. Well, I should be inside, we should be inside partying. I'm here with you. What else do you want? And the son is not getting this. We see the heart of the son. Can I go 5 more minutes? Is that okay? It's really warm in here too. Maybe I'm just getting all excited about this passage. I know what it is. Verse 29. Let me just read the verse and then just ask you a question. But he answered, the son answered and said to his father, look, for so many years I've been serving you, and I have never neglected a command of yours, and yet you have never given me a young goat so that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this, verse 30, when this son of yours came, who has devoured your wealth with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf for him. Is there anything legitimate about what the son is saying? Is there anything legitimate about what the son is saying?
Well, human viewpoints, it's very, yeah.
Yeah, on a human level, and we might even say, he's been there. He's been consistent. He's been obedient.
If he was underappreciated, blah, blah, blah.
And brothers tend to know what the other one's doing
Oh,
before the parents do.
You know what? This is the funny. The son, the older son, throws the younger son under the bus. He points to probably the worst thing he can imagine the younger son was doing. He doesn't know what nobody's probably heard the story of what the younger son has done. By the way, nobody knows what. I mean, he hasn't talked to him. Oh, by the way, what'd you do? He just assumes he's been hanging out with prostitutes. He paints the worst case scenario picture of what the younger son was doing, and that's what he accuses the younger son of doing. With no validity. Now, it's probably true, but it's probably true, but he doesn't have factual validity to back that up. What about the son? What about what he is saying is not legitimate? Verses 29 and 30. What is about what he is saying is not legitimate? I mean, other than the whole thing, but what?
Well, he acts like that there's just a certain, the implication is there's just a certain amount of salvation.
Okay.
It's
Yeah.
very limited.
Yeah.
And I want mine.
Okay. Yeah.
And, then if this, but I want mine.
Yeah.
And it's interesting also that the father divided his wealth, but he didn't give the older son's wealth to the younger to begin with.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. That's right.
The older son still had his.
That's right. That's right.
He had what was coming.
He probably had the greater portion. Yes, ma'am.
He's suggesting that the father loves the younger son more and that he doesn't love him.
Yeah. Yeah.
When he says, I never neglected a command of yours. Really?
I've never done anything wrong, Dad. Oh, come on.
Never, ever.
Is he maybe... Isn't it funny, by the way, when you vilify someone, you make yourself look better? He vilifies the son and probably is not entirely incorrect in what he says.